2 days ago, I was standing in my father's kitchen while he stared at me like I was a complete disappointment. My hands were shaking, but I refused to look away. He pointed at me and said, "You call that a real career?" The room went quiet after that. My mother stopped washing the dishes. My brother wouldn't even look at me. For a moment, I felt like I was 16 again, small, embarrassed, like nothing I had ever done mattered. But something inside me finally snapped. I looked him straight in the eyes and said something I had never dared to say before. What happened in that kitchen changed the way my father sees me forever. 2 days ago, I was standing in my father's kitchen, holding a glass of iced tea while everyone settled around the table for dinner. It was supposed to be one of those normal family nights. Nothing special. Just my parents, my brother, and me. My father was carving the roast like he always does, talking about work, bills, the usual things he likes to complain about. I was mostly quiet, listening, trying to enjoy the moment. Then he suddenly looked straight at me. "You still doing that little thing of yours?" he asked. I frowned a little. "What do you mean?" He shrugged like it was obvious. "Your career. Or whatever you call it." My brother let out a short laugh under his breath. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice calm. "It's not a little thing, Dad. It's my job." My father set the knife down on the cutting board and shook his head. "No," he said. "It's a hobby. Real adults have real jobs." For a second, nobody spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft clink of my mother's fork against her plate. She kept her eyes down, like she suddenly found the green beans very interesting. My brother leaned back in his chair, smiling like this was the most entertaining thing he'd seen all week. I could feel every pair of eyes in the room waiting for me to react. And in that moment, something inside my chest just sank. I was standing there in the same kitchen where I'd grown up, where I'd done homework at this very table, where my father used to tell me I could do anything if I worked hard enough. But now he was looking at me like I had somehow failed him. Like everything I had built meant nothing. And the worst part was, he didn't even hesitate when he said it. The truth is, that night didn't come out of nowhere. My father had been doubting me for as long as I could remember. It wasn't always loud. Most of the time it was quiet. Small comments. Little looks. The kind of things that slowly make you question yourself. When I first told my family what I wanted to do with my career, my father didn't yell or argue. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "We'll see how long that lasts." I laughed it off at the time. I told myself he just didn't understand. But the comments kept coming over the years. Whenever I tried to share something good that had happened at work, he would nod politely, then somehow turn the conversation toward my brother. "Your brother just got another promotion," he'd say. "Now that's real progress." Or he'd ask questions that didn't feel like questions at all. "So, are you actually making money with that yet?" At family gatherings, it became a pattern. My brother talked about offices, clients, business trips. My father listened proudly, asking details, telling relatives how hard his son worked. Then someone would turn to me. "And what about you?" Before I could even finish explaining, my father would wave his hand like he was brushing dust off the table. "She's still figuring things out. Still figuring things out." I heard that sentence so many times it started to stick to me. It didn't matter how much I worked. How many late nights I pushed through. How many small wins I collected along the way. To him, it was never serious. Never real. For years I told myself it didn't bother me. That I didn't need his approval. But standing there in that kitchen 2 nights ago, hearing him call my career a hobby in front of everyone. Something inside me finally cracked. Because it wasn't just a joke. It was years of doubt, all packed into one sentence. And the thing that kept running through my mind was this. Why was he suddenly pushing so hard now? My father didn't stop after that first comment. For a moment I thought maybe he would drop it. Maybe he would change the subject and move on like people usually do at dinner. But he didn't. He leaned back in his chair and looked around the table, like he wanted to make sure everyone was listening. Then he said it again, louder this time. "I'm serious," he said. "That thing she's doing isn't a real career." My chest tightened. My brother chuckled from across the table. "Oh, yeah," he said, shaking his head. "Her little projects. Little projects." He said it like it was a joke everyone should understand. My father nodded toward him. "Exactly. A hobby is fine when you're young. But eventually you grow up." I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. I kept my hands folded in my lap so nobody would see them shaking. My mother reached for the salt shaker and passed it to my father without saying a word. She still hadn't looked at me. That hurt more than I expected. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I work full-time, Dad." He waved his hand like he was brushing something away. "Working on something doesn't make it a career," he said. "A career pays the bills." My brother laughed again. "Maybe one day it'll turn into something," he added. "You never know." The table got quiet after that. Nobody defended me. Nobody changed the subject. They just sat there, like this was normal conversation. And I sat there too, staring down at my plate, trying to keep my breathing steady. But inside, it felt like the entire room was closing in on me. Because they all thought they understood my life. What none of them knew was that something huge had just happened to me that week. Something that would have changed the way this whole table was looking at me right now. Earlier that week, something happened that I hadn't told anyone about yet. Not my parents. Not my brother. No one in the family. I got the email on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting at my small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop open. At first, I thought it was just another message like the dozens I get every day. Requests. Updates. People asking questions about work. But when I opened it, I had to read the first line twice. Then a third time. I actually pushed my chair back from the table and just stared at the screen. After years of working, saving, and proving myself step by step, something had finally happened that changed everything for me. The kind of news that makes you sit there in silence for a minute because it doesn't feel real yet. My first instinct was to call someone. I picked up my phone, looked at my father's name in my contacts, and then I put the phone back down. I don't know why. Maybe part of me already knew how the conversation would go. He'd ask questions that sounded more like doubt than curiosity. "How stable is that? Are you sure it's not temporary? Do people actually make money doing that?" So I decided to wait. I told myself I'd share the news in person. Maybe at dinner. Maybe during a calm moment when everyone was relaxed. A moment when my father might actually listen. But standing there in his kitchen that night, hearing him call my career a hobby in front of the whole table, I realized something. He had absolutely no idea what had just happened in my life. No idea how far I had already come. No idea how much my work had grown. He was judging a version of me that didn't even exist anymore. And for the first time, I found myself wondering something I'd never seriously considered before. Should I tell them right there at the table? Or should I let them keep believing I was still the daughter who was figuring things out? I didn't argue with him. For a few seconds I just sat there, looking down at my plate while the room stayed quiet. My father picked up his fork again like nothing had happened. My brother took another sip of his drink. It was clear to them the conversation was over. But something inside me felt different. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood up from the table. "I think I'm going to head out," I said. My mother glanced up for a second, then looked back down again. My brother didn't say anything. My father looked annoyed. "What now?" he said. "You can't take a joke?" I grabbed my purse from the chair beside me and walked toward the hallway. Behind me I heard his voice again, louder this time. "See what I mean?" he said to the room. "She's always been too sensitive." I stopped for a second near the front door. Too sensitive. That's what he had called me my whole life whenever I reacted to something he said. If I got quiet, I was sensitive. If I defended myself, I was dramatic. If I walked away, I was overreacting. For years I tried to adjust myself so those words wouldn't apply anymore. I tried to stay calm. I tried to explain myself better. I tried to earn his approval one conversation at a time. But standing there with my hand on the doorknob, something finally became clear. He had already decided who I was. And nothing I said was going to change that. So I opened the door and stepped outside without another word. The air was cool, and the street was quiet. I walked to my car, got in, and sat there for a moment before starting the engine. As I pulled away from the house, the kitchen lights were still glowing through the window like nothing had happened inside. My chest still hurt, but underneath that hurt was something new. Not anger. Not even sadness. It was a quiet kind of certainty. For years I had tried to prove myself to my father with explanations and patience. But that drive home, I realized something simple. I was done trying to prove my life with words. When I got home that night, my apartment was quiet. I dropped my purse on the chair by the door and walked straight to the kitchen. The same cup I had used that morning was still sitting by the sink. My laptop was on the table where I had left it. For a minute I just stood there, replaying everything that had happened at dinner. My father's voice. My brother laughing. The way my mother wouldn't look at me. Then I opened my laptop. The screen lit up, and the email was still there at the top of my inbox. I clicked on it again. I had already read it several times that week, but I read it slowly one more time. The message was clear. Official. There was no misunderstanding it. After years of building my work piece by piece, after the late nights, the doubts, the moments when I wondered if my father had been right about me, I had reached a milestone that changed everything. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. Nobody had handed this to me. I had worked for it. Every rejection email. Every small job I took in the beginning. Every time someone told me it probably wouldn't work. All of it had led to this. For a long time, I had quietly hoped that one day my father would see the results and finally understand what I had been working toward. But that night something shifted in the way I looked at it. This wasn't about convincing him anymore. The truth was already sitting right there on my screen. Proof of what I had built. Proof that my career was real. Proof that the years he called figuring things out had actually been progress. I closed the laptop slowly and rested my hands on the table. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm. Because no matter what my father believed, this success was something he couldn't erase with a comment at the dinner table. The only question now was simple. If I decided to show him the truth, how would I do it in a way he couldn't brush off? A few days later, my mother called and asked if I was coming over for dinner again. Her voice sounded normal, like nothing unusual had happened the last time we were all together. "Your father's grilling tonight," she said. "Thought you might want to come by." For a moment I almost said no. Part of me didn't feel like sitting at that table again, pretending everything was fine. But another part of me knew this was exactly the moment I had been thinking about all week. So I said yes. That evening I pulled into the same driveway I had grown up parking in for years. The porch light was already on, and I could smell burgers on the grill. Inside, the house looked exactly the same as always. My mother was in the kitchen setting plates. My brother was leaning against the counter scrolling through his phone. My father was outside on the patio flipping burgers like he owned the place, which in his mind he probably did. When I stepped in, my brother glanced up. "Oh hey," he said casually. "You made it." No mention of the last dinner. No awkward pause. Just normal. My father walked in a minute later carrying a platter and started talking immediately. He told a story about someone at his work. Then another one about a neighbor down the street. The whole room filled with his voice the way it always did. He joked. He laughed. He acted like the head of the table, completely comfortable. Like he hadn't humiliated me in that same kitchen just a few nights earlier. I watched him for a moment while everyone sat down. For years, this was how things worked in our family. My father spoke. Everyone else adjusted around him. But tonight felt different. Not because he had changed. Because I had. I took my seat at the table and folded my hands in front of me. My heart was beating a little faster, but my mind felt clear. All week I had replayed that email in my head. All week I had thought about what it meant. And sitting there across from my father, I realized something simple. Tonight, I wasn't the same daughter he thought he understood. The only question left was whether I was finally going to say something, or sit there quietly like I always had before. Dinner had barely started when it happened. My father had just taken the first bite of his burger when he looked over at me. He didn't look angry. He didn't look serious either. If anything, he looked amused. Like he was about to make a harmless joke. "So," he said, chewing slowly, "have you figured out a real job yet?" The words landed on the table like they had the other night. My brother let out a small laugh before he could stop himself. My mother glanced at me quickly, then back at her plate. For a second, it felt exactly the same as before. The same table. The same question. The same expectation hanging in the air. They were waiting for the usual reaction. Either I would laugh it off, or I would get quiet and let the moment pass. My father took another sip of his drink and leaned back in his chair. "You know," he added, "at some point people have to stop chasing hobbies and start living in the real world." My brother shook his head with a smile. "Dad's just trying to help," he said. Nobody meant it to sound cruel. At least that's how they would explain it later. But sitting there, I could feel something different inside me. The tight feeling in my chest that usually showed up in moments like this, it wasn't there. Instead, there was a strange kind of calm. I picked up my napkin and set it neatly beside my plate. Then I looked straight at my father. "I actually have something to tell you," I said. My voice was steady. Not defensive. Not angry. Just clear. My father raised an eyebrow like he was mildly curious. "Oh, yeah," he said. My brother leaned forward a little, expecting another awkward explanation. But this time I didn't rush to justify anything. I simply met my father's eyes across the table and spoke. And the words that came out of my mouth next made the entire room go silent. I looked at my father and took a slow breath. "I actually did get some news this week," I said. My father shrugged like he expected it to be something small. "Oh, yeah," he said. "What kind of news?" I reached into my bag beside the chair and pulled out my phone. "I got confirmation on a project I've been working on for a long time," I said. "It was approved this week." My brother leaned back in his chair, still half smiling. "For what?" he asked. I turned the phone screen toward them and slid it across the table. It's a partnership agreement, I said. And the company finalized it on Tuesday. My father picked up the phone first. At first his expression didn't change. He was probably expecting to see something simple. Maybe a small contract. Maybe a short email. But the longer he looked at the screen, the quieter he became. My brother leaned over his shoulder. "What is it?" he asked. I spoke calmly while they read. "It's the largest project I've ever taken on," I said. The company reviewed my work for months before approving it. My brother's smile slowly disappeared. He straightened in his chair and looked at me. "Wait, this is real?" he asked. I nodded. "They confirmed everything this week," I said. "The contract, the budget, all of it." My mother had stopped eating completely. She looked between me and my father like she was trying to understand what was happening. I reached into my bag again and placed a printed document on the table. "That's the agreement," I said. "Signed and finalized." My father slowly set the phone down beside the paper. The kitchen was completely quiet now. The same table where my career had been called a hobby just days earlier suddenly felt very different. No one was laughing anymore. No one was making jokes about little projects. They were reading the proof sitting right in front of them. For the first time in a long while, nobody at that table looked at me like I was the one who needed to explain myself. And then my father finally lifted his head and looked at me. My father kept looking at the papers on the table. He didn't pick them up again. He just stared at them like he was trying to decide if they were real. The kitchen had gone completely quiet. My brother leaned back in his chair, no longer smiling. My mother folded her hands in her lap and waited. Everyone was watching my father. For the first time in a very long time, he didn't seem to know what to say. Usually he always had something ready. A joke. A comment. A quick way to turn the conversation back in his direction. But now he just sat there. Finally, he cleared his throat. "So, this is official?" he asked. His voice sounded different. Slower. Less certain. "Yes," I said. "It's official." He picked up the paper again and read the first page more carefully. His eyes moved across the lines, then down to the signatures at the bottom. My brother leaned forward slightly. "That's a pretty big number," he said quietly. No one laughed this time. My father set the paper down again and looked at me. For a moment he studied my face like he was trying to match the person sitting across from him with the version of me he had carried in his head for years. "You've been working on this a while?" he asked. "A few years," I said. He nodded slowly. The room stayed quiet again. I could see the shift happening in real time. The same man who had called my career a hobby was now staring at proof that something real had been built without his help, without his approval, and without his understanding. But even then, I didn't know what he was going to do next. My father had spent years doubting me. And sitting there at that table, one question hung in the air. Was he finally going to admit he was wrong, or find another way to tear me down? My father sat there for a long moment without speaking. He looked at the papers again, then back at me. For years, I had imagined what this moment might look like. I thought maybe he would argue. Maybe he would try to find a flaw in the agreement or explain why it still didn't count. That was the pattern. But this time he didn't do any of that. He leaned back slowly in his chair and let out a quiet breath. "Well," he said after a moment, "I guess I was wrong about that." The words hung in the air. My brother looked at him like he hadn't heard correctly. "You were wrong," he said. My father nodded once, still looking at me. I underestimated you, he said. I don't think anyone at that table had ever heard him say those words before. My mother looked up quickly, her eyes moving between both of us. My brother stayed quiet, almost like he didn't know where to look anymore. For a moment, nobody spoke. And I realized something strange. Hearing those words didn't feel the way I thought it would. For years, I had imagined how satisfying it would be for my father to finally admit he was wrong. But sitting there across from him, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt calm. I looked at him and spoke carefully. It was never really about proving you wrong, I said. My father listened quietly. I just wanted you to believe in me, I continued. Or at least respect the work I was doing. He nodded slowly. I should have, he said. The room stayed quiet again, but the tension that had been sitting at the table for years finally felt lighter. And even though my father had finally said the words I'd waited a long time to hear, I realized something inside me had already shifted long before that moment. That night ended quietly. After the conversation, we finished dinner like any other evening. Plates moved around the table. My mother asked if anyone wanted more salad. My brother started talking about something happening at his office. On the surface, everything looked normal. But something had changed. Not just in the room, in me. For years I had measured myself against my father's approval. Every comment from him carried weight. Every bit of doubt felt like something I had to correct. I thought if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, and explained myself clearly enough, he would eventually understand. But somewhere along the way, the work itself changed me. The late nights. The setbacks. The small wins that nobody saw but me. They built something stronger than approval. They built confidence. When I left my parents' house that night, my father walked me to the door. He didn't say much. That wasn't really his style. But before I stepped outside, he said something simple. Good work, he said. 2 short words. Coming from him, that was a lot. Over the next few weeks, I noticed small differences. When relatives asked about what I did for a living, my father didn't brush it off anymore. He actually explained it. Sometimes he even sounded proud. My brother stopped making jokes about my projects. And my mother, she started asking real questions about my work. But the biggest change wasn't in them. It was in me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I needed to defend my choices. I didn't feel like I had to prove my life was real. Because I already knew it was. Standing up for myself that night mattered. But the real strength didn't come from showing my father he was wrong. It came from finally understanding that my belief in myself had always been enough. Sometimes the real victory isn't proving someone wrong, it's finally believing in yourself. Was there a moment in your life when you stopped needing someone's approval? I'd love to hear about it.